So today we have an interesting one. I want to jump into a video to discuss a concept that is kind of out there. It's just talking about why do people leave the church? And so what I want to do first is I want to look at the scriptures to kind of give us a little bit of a framework, to give us a groundwork for where we're working. So let's look at it real quick. And what we have here, of course, is the book of Romans, chapter 1. If you're familiar with it, you know that Romans chapter 1 lays out the case for God's wrath against sin. And I like to encourage you to read the whole thing. Today, we're just going to start actually at verse 18. Paul's laying out the framework for the fact that God's wrath is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of men who, what do? They suppress the truth in their wickedness. For what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from his workmanship, so that men are without excuse. Full stop. There is no excuse for not believing in God. There is no excuse. Now, we can hypothesize and we can big brain it all we want. However, it's clearly written here that God has made himself known in the general revelation sense. Then he goes on in 21, he talks about, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him nor gave thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking and darkened in their foolish hearts. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of God, the glory of the immortal God, for images of mortal men and birds and animals and reptiles. And he goes in and talks about their lusts and their behaviors, their dishonorable passions, and so on and so forth. Jumping down to 28, furthermore, since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, he gave them over to a depraved mind to do what ought not to be done. And then it talks about how they became filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent new forms of evil. They disobey their parents, and they are senseless, faithless, heartless, merciless. Although they knew God's righteous decree that those who do such things are worthy of death, they not only continue in these things, but also approve of those who practice them. So that lays out the groundwork that there is no such thing as an atheist. There is no such thing as somebody who doesn't believe that there is a God. They know he's there. They just don't want to believe. And it's convenient to them to say that they don't believe. But at the end of the day, they know that there's a God. They know that they're guilty. Everybody knows that they're guilty. There's no way around that. We all know that we're guilty. So let's jump into this video that's discussing why blacks are leaving the church. I thought that was interesting. We've discussed this before, but I thought it was good. And I want to just address his 4 reasons, because I thought they were good reasons that he gave. They're cogent thoughts. And I just wanted to address those. It's not really attacking the person. It is from the Jude 3 project, so y'all know already. But it's not attacking the person or anything of that nature. It's just wanted to point out what he's saying. And let's just talk about whether these are valid arguments. So let's jump in. Let's go.
And I think there's 4 main reasons why people are leaving the faith and rejecting God. One is science. This whole sense that science and faith cannot be harmonized together.
Okay, let's stop right there. Science and faith can be harmonized. Science does not trump faith. Please understand, science is another faith. I mean, at the end of the day. So it can't trump our faith in God's unchangeable, immutable word and his characteristics. Science really can only point us to God. We don't change our faith or throw away our faith because of science. Science is only a tool to help us understand, and actually just points us to, because it doesn't actually answer many of the questions that it purports that it answers. But let's let him finish.
And again, Neil deGrasse Tyson is one of the examples of that. He's kind of in the whole line of of Carl Sagan, that the only thing that ever was, is, and will be is the cosmos, and people are looking at humanism as the answer.
Humanism can't be the answer. I mean, that's some stinking thinking. Let's say it like that. That's some stinking thinking. Humanism can't be the answer because humanism isn't the answer, because the question is not whether or not science is sufficient. I mean, that's not the question. The question is there a God? And we already know from Romans that there is a God that I'm going to ultimately be responsible to, that I'm going to ultimately have to answer to. And then the question is, how do I stand before a holy, just, and righteous God? Science does not disprove God. Science actually points to the truth and the reality of God. Come on.
Secondly, I think suffering is a big thing. You talked about it.
It sounds weird, but the suffering argument is such a beautiful example of God's sovereignty and his rule and reign over the affairs of man. It's hard to wrap our minds around because suffering is something that we don't like. We don't enjoy it. But I encourage you, if you're somebody that really is battling with that, spend some time in the book of Job. Read the book of Job. It's 50 chapters. It's long. There's a lot of talking going on in there, but take the time to read through the book of Job and understand that God sits over all of this. All of this. He is not bothered, worried, or confused by any of the issues that we go through as humans. And if we can wrap our minds around the fact that God is ultimately working this out for my good. And by my good, it might mean good here or might mean good in eternity. But God is ultimately working this out for my good. Suffering is not the boogeyman that we make it out to be. Suffering could actually be a catalyst to help us better understand God. All right, but let's let him finish.
The stuff that Black folks have gone through in the Black experience, from the transatlantic slave trade to Jim Crow to contemporary injustices, have caused people to say, if there is a God, where is he? Right?
Okay, so I bring this up a lot about live action role playing. The transatlantic slave trade more than likely happened to my ancestors. Facts. No argument there. But because that happened to my ancestors hundreds of years ago, that does not mean anything for me today. It doesn't. This notion that we keep bringing in and we keep live action role playing stuff that happened in the past and imposing that on us today is really silly. And it doesn't, that's not real suffering. I'll be honest with you. That's not real suffering. Anything that this gentleman just brought up, and I'll back it up a little bit just to give him a little bit of room. That's not real suffering. That's not suffering in the sake of looking at a Job. That's not suffering as looking like the Apostle Paul or Peter or Christ. That's not real suffering. Or Joseph, for crying out loud. That's not real suffering. What he's talking about is imposing somebody else's, what happened in them, on me, and especially something that happened in the past that didn't even happen in my lifetime. I wasn't even directly affected by it. But I don't want to go too long on that, but let's go.
Through in the Black experience, from the transatlantic slave trade to Jim Crow to contemporary injustices, have caused people to say.
I just want to ask, what are the contemporary injustices that this gentleman is going through? I just think that we're not doing ourselves any favors by constantly making up things and imposing things on our story that are not part of our story. That's not fair. That's not being honest. And it doesn't bode well for our testimony.
If there is a God, where is he? Right? Because all we've known is suffering.
Really?
Which leads,
again, like what's suffering? This gentleman does not look impoverished. He does not look beleaguered. He does not look malnourished. Neither of them. What suffering do you know, sir? Again, this is not the Black experience. We have to stop saying that. It's not the Black experience. Many people that, now granted, there are people who've had horrible experiences that are living today, not discounting that. But that's not the Black experience. That is that person's experience. Because these two gentlemen right here do not look like they've had some kind of Black experience. That's negative.
To the third reason why I think
Sure.
this movement is really gaining speed, and that is the silence of the church. If you think about the civil rights movement,
I think it's interesting that the silence of the church, I think we can make some hay out of that. But his immediate response, he did it with the suffering, and he did it here. He immediately talks about things that are live action role playing, that are ethereal to modern day Black people. I want to back that up again just to make sure I didn't misunderstand what he was saying. That's not something that's going on. The church, I do believe the church should say more things pertaining to sin going on in the world. No question about that. I do believe that should happen and it needs to happen. I'm looking forward to more churches being vocal and calling out sin. Not a problem. However, this is not it.
If you think about the civil rights movement, one of the major slogans of that, one of the signs that people would often wear is "I am a man." Blacks in particular, since we've been in America, have had to fight to be seen as fully human, right? We came here as property.
Okay, he's gonna say something that is not true, and I think it's interesting that in 2022 we're still saying this, and it shows again in the whole world's laughing at you video. I point out that if we argue and fight like the world, they win. So if the world sees and hears you citing their false narratives, they've won. And so he's about to do that right here. But let me let him do it. And I'm going to back up a little bit, as I like to do, just to give him a little running start.
We came here as property. Then you have the 3/5 compromise that was for political reasons.
3/5 compromise was not what we were told. It was not that you're only 3/5 of a human. That was not it. And he kind of talks about when he says it's political, but he knows that that's not what 3/5 compromise was at all. So again, the world laughs at us when we argue and show that we will not be honest in our argumentation and our presentation of information. They laugh at us. They scoff at us. Say, "Oh, look, they said they trusted God, but look at him lying. Look at him using faulty information. They won't look it up and study. They won't do their own research." It makes us look bad.
Then finally, you get to the Bill of Rights, the Civil Rights Movement, voting rights, where you get seen as fully human. But we've had to fight for that, right? And with the injustices that are happening in our streets every day.
And again, what injustices are happening in our streets every day? He's assuming something, but nobody's pushing back to actually ask what injustices are happening every day in our streets. I would just ask him that, because otherwise he's besmirching his testimony. He's making a fool and a mockery of Christians, because the world sees this and they say, this dude is using our same logic. He's using our same speaking points. We know we're lying. We know that we're making this up, and he's doing the same thing. And he professes to be a Christian. He professes to be in the truth, and he's not being honest. That's all.
The thought is, man, who's going to affirm my humanity? And if the church is silent and not affirming humanity, people are going to leave,
No, that's not why people leave. People leave the church because they don't love God. People leave the church because they don't love Christ. They don't love the God of the church. That's why they leave. They don't leave because somebody didn't affirm them. Because I promise you, I have not wondered, does anybody affirm me as a man? And there are times when I'm down in the dumps, and man, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. But I've never felt like somebody needs to affirm my manhood. I've never done that. And I'm going to go out on a limb that many of these people, I'm going to go on a limb that these two gentlemen have not had that either. They've not sat there and wondered if somebody was going to affirm their manhood. It's not going to happen. I just don't believe it. I'm sorry. Maybe it did happen, but I don't believe it.
No. And then the fourth thing I would say is what I call statism. And that is this thought that religion is really a political statement. It's not a matter of faith. It's not a matter of morality. And when people see the church as either the religious wing of either party, Democrat or Republican. They kind of check out of that because they.
I think that this is probably one that can make a lot of hay. And when the church does become too political, I think we can definitely get in there. But it's a sticky wicket. And I don't honestly think people, maybe they do. Maybe they leave the church because their church is too political. Okay, fine. I just don't think that's really happening, though. I really don't think that's the capstone for why somebody leaves the church, because Paul said that they don't love God. That's why.
Think it's a political game instead of something that is really going to transform my life. And I think that these factors, Brandon, unfortunately, aren't going anywhere.
Okay. So I thought that was good, though. I thought his points about science and suffering and the silence of the church and seeing the church as like a political vehicle, I think that's fine. I mean, there's definitely room to make that argument both ways. And when the church leaves its mission, I think we do see these things happen. But really, it's the people. It's not the church primarily. It's the people. Are they seeking a church that loves God? I'm sorry, seeking a church because they love God? I think that should be the question that we ask. Grace and peace.